Hello everybody, welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today we'll be doing a box office breakdown for this past weekend, which saw Transformers Rise of the Beast have a pretty mediocre opening weekend. It came in well over the projections going into the weekend, so that's a good thing, and it's definitely a better opening weekend than what you saw with Bumblebee from a few years ago, but in comparison to the heyday of the Transformers movies, this film is still a far cry from those movies, and so that's why it's a mediocre opening really at best, because yes, it is doing better than some, but it is also still not really doing all that great, and its chances of breaking even are a question mark. At least at this point, at this early date, what we can say is that the chances of it breaking even are possible. There is definitely a chance for this film to reach that point. However, it would essentially have to have a hold of what we're seeing similar to that of Across the Spider-Verse, which, nearing $400 million, is already profitable. And it's amazing to see, especially in this film's case, getting close to $100 million in net gain profit, while Little Mermaid is looking at well north of $100 million in losses, despite what Scotty Boy Mendelson has to say about the film doing really well domestically. We'll talk about that in a little bit as well. Before we get further, though, please make sure to smash that like button, not that fire button if you're watching over on Odyssey, and smash the rumble button as well. And also make sure that you are subscribed to the channel with that bell notification on that. That way you know every time video or live stream goes live on the channel. Can never get through those, but thank y'all very much for watching today. And also thank y'all for y'all's patience as I was out of town at the Dallas Friday Night Tights meetup. So if you were there, thank you so very much for showing up. It was a ton of fun. Also, the plushies, the Friday Night Tight plushies, those are now on sale. So I'm just so amazed that that mine is already over 60% of the way to the goal. There's still 3 weeks left, and so I'll try and put in the pinned comment below a link if you want to buy yourself a Templar Odin Crusader plushie. It's really awesome, and also you can buy the others on the Friday Night Tights crew as well, and yeah, it really does help, and thank you very much for your love and support. All right, enough for promoting myself, let's go ahead and talk about the box office. Transformers Rise of the Beast, as Nancy, good old Nance over on Deadline has to say, pounces, oh, don't you always love their puns, on $171 million global bow. Across the Spider-Verse nears $400 million worldwide. So what that tells me is, yeah, Transformers is doing okay. Spider-Verse is doing very, very well. This film is going to easily cross the entirety of the first Spider-Verse film, and that's exactly what you want to see in a sequel, especially when you're only spending another, $10 to $15 million on the production budget between the first and second movie, when you're not only spending much less, or rather, not nearly as much as you could on a second film in a franchise. The fact that you're also seeing a massive increase in the overall ticket sales is a very good sign for your franchise, especially with the next film set to come out next year, Beyond the Spider-Verse, and that's not going to get confusing at all when talking about these films in just a few years. But talking first about Transformers, as it says over here at Deadline, in 68 overseas markets, Paramount, Skydance, Hasbro's, that's a fun title, Transformers Rise of the Beast has pounced on a $110 million opening weekend. Combined with domestic, that gives the Autobots and Maximals a global debut of $170.5 million, coming in ahead of projections. And then they give a hyperlink here, and they say that looks to roar with $155+ million opening weekend. So in comparison to the 170, yes, it's better than what had been expected, but even they were expecting the film to come in probably a little bit higher than what their initial estimates had been. And the question really is, how much more and how much better is that versus what they were expecting? Again, it's definitely good, but let's just say it's not Mario good, right? When Mario came in over projections, it came in to an insane degree, so much so that every time they updated their numbers, they were incorrect, right? They were wrong in the entirety of the way, including myself, right? Thinking that that film had no chance of $1 billion, so how wrong I was. In this case, though, we are seeing a much more normal opening weekend where, hey, it's opening up around projections, a little bit higher, but not to the degree that you would think this film has a rich future for it, especially if the things that I'm hearing about the movie itself, haven't really heard a lot of great things about it from a lot of people that I've talked to at the very least. And again, I'm not a big fan of this franchise in general. We'll have to wait and see what those numbers end up being. But as this early date, the chance of it breaking even, there's a chance, but we still have to actually get there. Going on, it says, offshore and excluding China, the debut is 36% ahead of a previous title, Bumblebee, which opened during the Christmas corridor in 2018. And speaking of that movie, let's go ahead and look at some comparisons between this Transformers film, Rise of the Beast, and some of the other ones. One thing that I think is very interesting is the fact that Bumblebee actually cost significantly less. Now, these numbers have been adjusted using the calculation on the numbers. I will be creating a chart, and I'll probably cover this on one of my morning streams this week, going in depth into the entire Transformers franchise, looking at the opening weekend, looking at the average ticket prices, and showing y'all exactly where this film's health is as far as average ticket sales are for this movie. But even just based on a general idea, right? We know that average ticket price these days is close to $13 to $14. We know that back in 2018, it was probably closer to 10, if not a little below 10, right? Actually, maybe even the $9 range. So we can already see from that, yeah, even though the Bumblebee film had a $24 million opening weekend versus the $60.5 million, that difference in ticket sales probably gets the films to be a lot closer than one would actually suspect. So that is going to be something that I'll be able to confirm for sure this coming week when I actually have the official chart in front of me. But as I did not have time to do so today because family, I will try and get that done sometime this week. But overall, as you can see, hey, this film doing better than what Bumblebee did by quite a large margin there, but only slightly better than The Last Knight from 2017. That's officially the last Transformers labeled movie, right? Bumblebee, though a part of the Transformers universe, was not actually promoted as Transformers Bumblebee, right? It was just Bumblebee. And so one has to ask the question of, maybe did that impact the number of people going to see it? Obviously, you saw the trailer, you knew it was a Transformers film. If you know anything about the Transformers franchise, you recognize that name, right? But for some people, hey, maybe they saw it and said, hey, maybe it's a film about an actual Bumblebee. I don't know. Maybe they thought it was the B movie too, for all I know. What I do know is that it's definitely still, again, regardless of any of that, a better performer than that movie, but only marginally better than the last officially labeled Transformers film, The Last Knight from 2017, when you adjust for inflation using just their calculations and not using the more up-to-date numbers, right? 52 million versus 60 million. Okay, it's better, but then compare that to Age of Extinction, 127 million. Dark Side of the Moon, 128 million, $150 million, right? So this is like the peak of the entirety of the franchise, especially domestically. That was back in 2009. So 150 million versus 60. So this film doing better than what had been expected. However, not nearly anywhere close to the heyday of the Transformers universe. And what does that say? That says that there's not a lot of people left in that franchise as far as fans are concerned. And when I say that, I don't mean that there's nobody. I just mean in comparison to what this film used to do, right? The franchise used to be a billion-dollar franchise, right? You go back to 2009, $1 billion. Last Night, we saw, again, from that, we saw this decrease over time between all these movies, really. Last Night, we saw the biggest drop-off from 127 opening to $52 million opening. We also saw a huge drop from a $1.4 billion in 2014 to a $700 million. This is when we were able to tell, even back then, 2017, yeah, this franchise is essentially donezo, right? And then they tried to do something a little bit different with Bumblebee, spent a lot less money, right? Look at close to $300 million, $250 million, $260, $250, $195 for Rise of the Beast, which is definitely on its side. It's definitely a good thing, but whether or not it's going to make money still remains to be seen. What we can say, though, is that its overall opening weekend really only does better than what we saw with Bumblebee. And some people might be wondering, but wait a minute, why is it that The Last Knight actually has a higher number here? Well, remember, this film would have come out back in June, so this would have been June 21st. So I'm guessing that this film then would have had the holiday weekend, and so because of that, they were able to, or rather, they released this film a little bit earlier, and so they would have been able to add on to those overall profits, right? Which is why you see this is 16 and 43 and not 25 and 25, etc. So even though the 3 days, again, the Rise of the Beast did better, it is interesting still nonetheless to see where this film will end up in comparison between those two. And also when you look at the opening weekends, right? First Friday is the only day that this film really has any type of edge over The Last Knight. So that's the reason why, again, it's okay, it's doing fine, but still has a lot of work to actually do. Let's go ahead and look at the numbers domestically for this past weekend. So first off, with Transformers, it did make 60.5. Remember, going into the weekend, Box Office Pro had projected that the film would actually come in number 2, or had a chance of coming in number 2. That did not happen, right? This film actually ended up doing better than what the projections had, and that meant that $60.5 million was enough to beat out the second weekend numbers for Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse of $55.4 million. Now, that's pretty impressive, right? Look at that hold there of 54%. Now, some people might be saying, but wait a minute, why didn't you say it was impressive when Little Mermaid had a drop that was in the 50s? The biggest reason as to why that is the case is because percentage is not the entirety of the story, right? I think I've mentioned this in previous accounts, right? When I say, hey, look at that strong hold. The problem, though, is that the hold is strong, but the opening weekend was not all that high in the first place, and so therefore you could have an insane 15% drop, but if your opening weekend is abysmal, you're holding from something small. And so it can only help you so much, right? When you have a strong opening weekend, especially if it's better than what projections had been, and then you're having a strong hold in addition to that, that is the telltale sign of a healthy film, of a healthy run, of a film's chances of breaking even becoming very high. With Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse had a massive opening weekend, right? Well over $100 million, came in well over projections. So a 54% hold is very, very good. This film already at $225 million. Now, remember, I've been talking about this last video too. I was saying, when is Spider-Verse going to catch up to and cross Little Mermaid? It's just a matter of time because Spider-Verse had a much better opening weekend, not only domestically, but also internationally. Well, hey, it's about a couple days away probably from that actually happening. $225 million total domestic for Spider-Verse versus the $228 of Little Mermaid. Now, this kind of goes back to that comment that has been made by Scotty Boy Medicine. He used to be a writer at Forbes, talking about the box office, always doing just silly things. He's still apparently on social media. I don't know who he's working for now, but yeah, he's still out there saying silly things. So he says, well, let's just forget for a second about those international numbers, right, for this movie, because domestically it's doing fantastic. Okay, this film's still doing worse than what Aladdin did domestically, and the fact that this film in 3 weeks, it took only 2 weeks for Spider-Verse to make? Okay, you can say, oh, in comparison to other films, in comparison to other franchises, and okay, that's all fine and dandy, but it's just not based in the actual reality of the situation, especially when you remember Spider-Verse cost $100 million. The budget, therefore, for the marketing is a lot less than what it would be for Little Mermaid's cost, which was production budget of $250 million. So a minimum of $125 million in marketing for that movie. There's been reports of it being close to $150 million for Little Mermaid. So you're spending so much more money on production, on marketing, and you're only at $228. And then a movie that probably cost and spent half of what you did is almost right there up there with you. That tells you a lot about the film itself and about the reality of whether or not the domestic is really all that healthy, Scotty boy. But what would I know? I'm just a dude talking to a camera for fun. Anyway, Little Mermaid dropping 45%. So percentage-wise, yes, these holds have been strong. Its second weekend drop hold was good. Its third week drop has been good. But domestically is the only place this film is doing anything. This film is essentially non-existent internationally. This film is not doing well in comparison to Spider-Verse internationally. Remember, Spider-Verse is nearing $400 million in 2 weeks. This film, yeah, not even in the same league in many ways. And we'll do some comparisons in a little bit. But anyway, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 coming in the number 4 spot, 34% drop. This film has crossed $800 million worldwide. Kudos to them. This film, I think, still has a chance of being able to, not a guarantee, but a chance that it will cross Wakanda Forever. I hope it does, because this film was significantly better than Wakanda Forever, even though the modern day MCU is still in a lot of trouble. Right? This film is doing well because the film itself individually was good. And remember, the film was good, and yet, or at the very least, some would say parts of it were good. I think that even if you didn't like the movie, you'd be willing to say that. I'm someone who wasn't a big fan of the movie, but I still can admit that there are parts in there that I do like, and I can understand why people held on to those parts, and it has led to the film having, again, financial success. You have to remember, though, the film was essentially a self-contained story. It's not building really up to anything else that's going to be a part of the major phase storyline and story arcs for this upcoming phase of the MCU. And so, yeah, that's a very bad sign. Everyone's going to go see it, but next time you have a promotion for the next MCU movie, which is what? The Marvels? Yeah. Why would anyone want to go see that, especially when there's not going to be anything with Guardians in any real way associated with it? The Boogeyman for 20th Century Studios, which essentially is Disney, 44% hold in its second week. So remember, hey, 44% hold. All right, that's a good percentage hold. Opening weekend was not very strong, though. This film, though it did not cost a whole lot, still cost enough to where it needs to do a lot better than that. This film likely going to be a box office flop at this point in time. Fast 10, also massive budget, 4 weeks out. This film already available on demand. This film's already available on demand, which tells me a lot. It tells me Universal's trying to save some face with this movie, trying to see if they can try to make some money from those video on demand rentals. And hey, maybe they're going to be able to do that. But yeah, this film, as you can see, next to nothing domestically. The fact that you see Little Mermaid and Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse doing twice as much as this film did tells you all you need to know about Fast 10 as a domestic release not doing well, but also where this film will probably end up as a box office flop in the future. Super Mario Brothers 10 weeks out still is hanging on, making $2 million. That's still pretty impressive, right? Dropped 555 screens and still has a decent per theater ratio for what it has. So hey, kudos to them adding more money to that. Number 8 spot, About My Father from Lionsgate, flop. The Machine, flop. Third week of release. And then the A24 release Past Lives, which is having one of these weird releases. $20,000 per theater screen ratio is very, very impressive. But these A24 releases, they drive me insane. Looking at the international numbers, you can see Transformers Rise of the Beast, $170.5 million. So not a terrible number there, but also not all that impressive. Now, remember, I've been covering this on the box office breakdowns for the last several weeks, mentioning how I recently discovered that if you actually look at the opening weekend worldwide and compare it to the entirety of the total of all the films that I've been covering since 2019, going all the way back to Joker, you actually see that the average opening weekend globally compared to its end result is around 35%. So what that tells me is that on average, films make about a third of their entire box office in the first week. If that number holds, that would mean that Transformers at 170 would be then ending around somewhere around $500 million worldwide. Now, how close it gets to that number, that's where those holds, those week 1 to week 2 holds, those week 2 to week 3 holds come in. But we can already kind of begin to formulate, all right, this film has probably a good chance of being able, again, on average, if the film has an average level drop across all markets, $500 million is absolutely a number that this film can hit. However, its break-even point is around that amount, and so because of that, yeah, that means that this film has a good chance and probably a highest chance of breaking even. Maybe it does better than expected. We'll know that after the week 2 drop-off because that tells us a little bit about the legs of the movie. That's why it's a little bit more reliable. But again, that's why the movie's opening right now is mediocre. It's fine, but it's not all that impressive. Some people might think it is impressive, especially compared to what the projections were, but I'm more long, I'm more of a historical mindset where I think to myself, okay, yes, this might be doing better than certain things within the past couple of weeks, but what does this actually mean for the franchise and what does this actually mean in the long run for it? But those are numbers as they stand. I had shown this chart a little bit earlier. So that, again, $170 million worldwide opening. I'm looking at that number. I'm looking at last night. I'm looking at Bumblebee. And remember, I said before about $500 million being a likely scenario. That means that even though this film, right, cost a little bit more than Bumblebee, so not nearly as much as their other franchises, but also a lot more than what Bumblebee did, you're still looking like the film probably will end around the same amount of money. And again, for a franchise, that is not good. If you're doing just as well or maybe even less than the last film in your franchise and you're spending more money than the last film in your franchise, that's not a good thing financially. So that's why I think Rise of the Beast, again, it's okay in the opening weekend, still has a long way to go. Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse at $389.9 million, so very close to $400 million, doing very, very well. Again, domestically, very strong after just 2 weeks of release. Little Mermaid has crossed $400 million, and some might say, well, wait a minute, this film's crossed $400 million, Spider-Verse hasn't. Yeah, but also remember, this film has a week's advantage on that movie. Right? And it's interesting because even though that number is higher, again, because of the differences in those weeks, remember, I was showing this the other day. Let's go ahead and do that live because we love to do that here. Also, I will call out Sony continuously, right? $28.5 million being reported. This number will get updated over the next couple of days as the numbers starts to input their data. But still, 75% of that is going to the Chinese Communist Party. So Sony, stop doing deals with them. You don't need their money. Period. And stop. Let's go ahead and look at Mexico. $11.7 million, $11 million for United Kingdom there versus Little Mermaid. United Kingdom, right? $20 million. So this is, again, where it has that weak advantage, and yet it's only about $9 million more than what Spider-Verse is, and that is the best performing market for this movie. So that's the reason why the film has a long way to go and probably won't be able to hit any type of break-even point. When $500 million becomes a likely scenario, and most people in the media are saying $500 million or a little over, a little under, is probably where the film's going to end up. Yeah, when you break evens a minimum of $625 million, that is abysmal. Doesn't matter what the domestic is, especially when the domestic is not all that impressive in reality when you're actually talking about it in a fair way. Guardians of the Galaxy, $805 million worldwide. Very impressive numbers there. In fact, even if you have a 3 times multiplier, guess what? Film has broken even and also is adding to its profits. Boogeyman at $39.6 million worldwide, really not doing much internationally. These types of films tend not to, and yet, because even though the film costs around $35 million, probably not going to be able to make its money back. Fast 10, $652 million. This film is essentially just slowing down to quite an insane degree. Remember also that internationally, which is where this film has most of its money, again, about 4/5 of its entire box office is coming internationally, with the vast majority of that coming from China. Yeah. Again, I will call out Universal in this case because stop doing deals with China. In your case, you you actually do need China, because without that film, without China, without $130 million, you're looking at this film being, again, in the $500 to $400 million range. So I can see why you need that money, or you think you need that money, but because you get so little back on that investment, I don't think it's smart money. Super Mario Brothers movie, $1.3 billion, very impressive there. About My Father, 11.3 is a flop. The Machine, also 10.2, a flop. Going to the box office charting, because I love to do charting here. Again, I mentioned this earlier about the opening weekend numbers. Just very impressive, or very, very interesting, I would say. Right? If you go ahead and look at where all these films in their opening weekend stand, in comparison to their end result, right? You have a film like Cats, where the opening weekend for it was around 15% worldwide. Again, had a massive, gigantic drop in its second weekend. A film like Bloodshot had a 65% comparison. Going to more recent films, Uncharted was around 35%. Sonic the Hedgehog around 35%. Memory, The Northman, 34%. Fantastic Beasts, 48%. Again, a lot more money that was made, or rather, a lot of big drop-offs for that film. 38% for Lightyear. So, yeah, as you can see, right, there are a lot of movies on this chart that are falling within that 30% range, right? So it is interesting to see where this film will end up in the long run as far as not Fantastic Beasts, but Rise of the Beast is concerned. But let's go ahead and look at the charting. Again, that $200 million of a production budget, this is really where its major flaw is, right? There's reports of it being somewhere between 190 and $200 million. So I think $200 million is probably fair based on how much money these films have cost in the past. That means right now this film is at $197 million in the red. It needs to make around $500 million to break even on a more conservative side. So yeah, not a good look overall. Spider-Verse, though, in its second week of release, we can now make some projections. So remember, last weekend I said $600 million actually is a pretty decent chance, right? Using that 3 times the opening weekend, or rather the opening weekend being a third of the entirety of the box office metric that I had just recently figured out. If you use that right, the $200 million, if that is just if that is a third of the entire box office, then you're looking at around 600. Well, look at these projections. You can kind of see why that metric makes a lot more sense now. If this film has a massive drop-off, if this film sees the legs fall off completely, it's looking at a minimum of $557 million, whereas a max, if it doubles its entire box office, you're looking at $780 million. So this film has a good chance, on average, right, to end somewhere around $600 million. So that tells us that the film is not only doing on average what other films would do, but it's even doing better, right? And I had mentioned before about how that drop-off, especially compared to its opening weekend, is very, very impressive. Comparing that to the current numbers, as you can see, this film is already at $83 million in net gain profits, and is going to make somewhere between $180 and $300 million. So somewhere probably around $200 million in net profits. This movie is going to be paying not only for itself, but also for a future installment. So you already have Beyond the Spider-Verse coming out next year. So this film already has made the amount of money needed to cover the cost, and even some of those marketing costs. If you take all the profits from both Spider-Verses combined, yeah, you're seeing a franchise that, this is what a franchise is supposed to do, right? It's supposed to pay for itself, and it's also supposed to pay for your future projects, right? I think it was Valiant Renegade who had been talking, shout out to him, awesome channel, also covers box office, about how that is what you need to have in a movie, right? A tentpole, right? A tentpole figure is going to be a film that is able to, I think Gary over at Nerdrotic has talked about this too, right? Is meant to cover your cost and extend into the future as well. Hey, Spider-Verse is absolutely doing that at this point in time. Looking at The Boogeyman, right, at the $35 million budget, that means the film needs to break even around 87.5. Based on the numbers that we're seeing right now, it's looking like it's going to lose at least a few $1,000,000. So not a massive flop, but yeah, not looking very good at this point. Machine and About My Father are still doing about what we thought they were going to do. So looking at massive flops there. Little Mermaid at $414 million. Even though this film has crossed $400 million, remember, this film still has to make $625 minimum worldwide to break even. And when everyone in the mainstream media especially is already admitting that this film's international has been terrible, $500 million is what they're saying is the likelihood for this movie. That would mean this film is guaranteed to lose quite a bit of money. Conservatively, $100 million. I would say probably closer to 150 if these numbers continue to hold. Fast 10 is still $100 million in the red, and the biggest reason why this film has not made any money is because of that massive budget. This film needed to make $850 million worldwide to break even, and that's a minimum. So some would have this break-even point be closer to $1 billion. No matter which way you spin it, this film is looking like it's going to be probably around roughly $100 million in financial losses. Hypnotic hasn't really done much of anything, right? No updates there. $805 million right now for Guardians. That film, well over $100 million in net gain profit. If you have a 3 times break-even point, it's a little bit less. Either way, film has made its money back, and hey, even has a chance of being able to catch up with a film like Wakanda Forever. And as far as any other films that have been updated are concerned, Super Mario Bros. Movie at $1.3 billion. That's just insane. Look at those profit margins, right? Even if you have a more rigorous metric there, you're probably at least giving this film $500 million in net profits. That is just darn impressive. So my charting has it well over 600 million. Some people might have it closer to 5. Either way, that is still massive, massive profits, and something that The Little Mermaid will never, ever be able to get even close to. Couldn't even dream about it. While you're singing to be part of someone's world, you should be instead singing a song about, I need money. Anyway, you're welcome. Let me know your thoughts about any of these things I mentioned in the comment section down below. Let me know also, question of the day, Transformers Rise of the Beast. Do you think the film is going to be able to break even $500 million? Again, as I mentioned, historically, there is precedent to say that it could still happen. $170 million opening weekend. Hey, you've seen a lot of films. A lot of films have been able to get to $500 million worldwide based on that number. We'll have to see what the week 2 drop-off is, especially when there will be more competition next weekend. And also another question, Spider-Verse. Where do you think this film's going to end up? I think $600 million is going to be kind of that average, that very likely endpoint for it. And hey, the fact that it's going to make over $100 million more in the worldwide box office versus Little Mermaid makes me very happy. And it also continues to show why the narrative that was being run and was being spun about people being racist as to why they hated Little Mermaid can't really say the same thing as far as what's going on with Spider-Verse and how much better it is doing in comparison. And let's just say, I think there's actually a good chance, too, that the film could actually hit the Little Mermaid's break-even point, which would then completely, dissolve any argument that anyone would have comparing those two films in a negative way. But anyway, let me know your thoughts about this and anything else I mentioned in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button, let the fire button, I can smash the rumble button as well. Be on the lookout for my live streams this week, the Good Morning Asgard podcast. I will try and do some deeper dives into Transformers franchise, continue to cover Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, and a plethora of other things. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Also, check out the pinned comment below on how to get a Crusader Knight plushie. You guys are great. Have a wonderful day, everybody. A blessed Sunday, and as always, God bless. And now for a huge special shout out to all of my June Patreon, Subscribe Star, and Locals members at the Keeper, the Bifrost level and above. Starting off first with Patreon, Father Luca Illich, Heimir Irie Hymason, Garrett Searles, Joe Horn, Jonathan Carney, Orange Hat Reviews, you can check it over at his YouTube channel, Orange Hat Reviews, Laura, the Modern Major General Story, Rosetta Allen, who you can check out at her YouTube channel of Eagle Rider, and Miss Martin Muses, who you can check out at her YouTube channel by the same name as well. Also to my Subscribe Star peeps, Matt317, check out his Twitch channel by the same name, Fast Reaction, The R, Mr. Roy, J-Rod the Beer Guru, and ZK-Man, who you can check out over at xtheboundaries.co. And lastly, to my Locals members, Miss Minnesota Hockey Fan, How About a Hockey Player, J.H. Schwalbach, and Robert Barnes, the amazing lawyer. And again, thank you all very much for being my supporters. If you want your name shout out at the end of every live stream and every video, check out the top link in the video description below. You also can get access to things like a giveaways channel where I give away Blu-rays, 4K steelbooks, all kinds of stuff every single, most weeks in the month. I try to give away something, or at the very least towards the end of the month, I will make it up with several giveaways. Basically, most people are guaranteed to walk away with something at the end of every single month. So if you want access to that, again, check out the top link in the video description below, as well as access to an exclusive podcast. This past month, I was actually able to record a great podcast with Michelle from Force of Light Entertainment. So you want access to that and also a plethora of other content, check out the link in the video description below. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.